Snow fell heavy on Christmas Eve as the single dad locked up his small home. That's when he saw the old man, shivering, lost, and confused. People passed him by without stopping. The dad hesitated. He had kids to think about. Then the old man whispered, "Please, I just need somewhere warm." Against his better judgment, the dad opened his door. He had no idea that choice would save his own life by morning. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from so we can bring more stories like these. Christmas Eve always felt quieter after midnight. Not the peaceful kind of quiet either. The kind that sits heavy on your chest, like the house is holding its breath. Daniel Moore stood at the kitchen sink, staring at the thin line of frost crawling along the inside of the window. Outside, the streetlight flickered, casting pale yellow shadows across the snow-dusted sidewalk. The clock above the fridge ticked louder than it should have. Daniel dried his hands on a towel that had seen better days and glanced toward the hallway where his kids slept. Lily's door was cracked open, a soft glow from her nightlight spilling onto the carpet. Down the hall, Noah snored lightly, one sock kicked off in his sleep like he'd been fighting imaginary dragons again. Daniel smiled despite himself. That smile didn't come easy anymore. Life hadn't been gentle since Maria passed. 3 years had slipped by, but grief didn't follow calendars. It showed up when he folded laundry and found one of her old sweaters, when a song came on the radio at work, when Lily asked questions Daniel still didn't have answers for. So he stayed busy, always busy, double shifts delivering packages, overtime whenever his supervisor offered it, late nights with spreadsheets spread across the table, figuring out which bill could wait another week, which apology he'd have to make to the kids this time. Christmas this year was simple. No piles of presents, no fancy dinners, just a small artificial tree in the corner, a string of uneven lights, and 3 homemade ornaments the kids had painted at school. Daniel knelt beside the tree and adjusted one that leaned crooked. "There we go," he whispered, like the tree could hear him. He pressed his palm flat against his chest and bowed his head. "Thank you, Lord," he murmured, "for another day, for keeping my baby safe, for giving me enough." Enough, that word carried him through a lot. He stood, grabbed the trash bag from the counter, and slipped on his worn jacket. The cold bit immediately when he opened the door. December didn't care about your struggles. It just showed up sharp and unapologetic. The air smelled like snow and chimney smoke. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed. A door slammed. Life kept moving. Daniel stepped onto the porch and headed toward the trash bin near the sidewalk. That's when he saw him. At first, Daniel thought it was a shadow, just a shape bent awkwardly beneath the streetlight. Then the shape moved. Slow, unsteady. An elderly black man stood near the curb, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a thin coat that looked like it belonged in October, not late December. His shoulders were hunched, his breath visible in short, shaky bursts. He turned in a slow circle, confusion written all over his face. Daniel froze. Every instinct screamed caution. It was late. His kids were inside. He didn't know this man, didn't know what kind of trouble could come with stopping. Daniel tightened his grip on the trash bag. The old man took a step, then another, almost slipping on the icy patch near the curb. He caught himself on a mailbox and laughed softly, like he was embarrassed by his own body. Sorry," he muttered to no one. Daniel's chest tightened. Maria's voice crept into his mind. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the way she used to say things when she wanted him to listen. Kindness is never wasted. Daniel let out a slow breath. He set the trash bag down. "Hey," he called gently, keeping his distance. "Sir, you all right?" The man turned, eyes wide and unfocused, then softened when he saw Daniel. "Oh, hello," he said, voice thin but polite. "I didn't mean to be in the way." "You're not," Daniel replied quickly. "It's cold out here. You need some help?" The man frowned, thinking hard. I missed the bus," he said. "Or maybe I didn't. I'm supposed to be somewhere." "Where's that?" Daniel asked. The man opened his mouth, then closed it. Panic flickered across his face. "I had it a second ago," he whispered. "My daughter. She was right here." Daniel felt something twist inside him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elijah," the man said after a pause. "Elijah Turner." "Okay, Mr. Turner," Daniel said calmly. "My name's Daniel. You got a phone? Anyone I can call?" Elijah patted his pockets, shaking his head. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be trouble." "You're not trouble," Daniel said firmly. A gust of wind cut through the street, making Elijah shiver hard. Daniel hesitated. Money was tight. The house was small. The world wasn't exactly safe anymore. Every news headline reminded you why people kept doors closed. But then he thought about Lily's laugh, Noah's trust, the kind of man he wanted them to grow up believing their father was. "You want to come inside for a bit?" Daniel asked. "Warm up? We can figure things out." Elijah looked up at him like he'd just offered him the moon. "I don't want to impose," he said softly. "You won't," Daniel replied. "Promise." After a long second, Elijah nodded. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and old pine needles from the tree. Daniel handed Elijah a blanket and guided him to the couch. "Sit right here," Daniel said. "I'll get you some soup." Elijah folded his hands in his lap, eyes darting around the room. "You got kids?" he said quietly. "Yeah," Daniel smiled. "Two." "They're lucky," Elijah said. "A warm house matters." Daniel paused. So did kindness. As the pot warmed on the stove and the clock ticked toward Christmas morning, Daniel had no idea that this small decision, opening his door, ignoring fear, choosing compassion, was about to save everything he loved. And he definitely didn't know that the stranger shivering on his couch wasn't just lost. He was exactly where he needed to be. The soup simmered quietly on the stove, the kind of low, patient bubbling that felt comforting just to hear. Daniel stirred it slowly, careful not to clatter the spoon too loud. The house was old and every sound carried, especially at night. Behind him, Elijah sat stiff on the couch, blanket wrapped tight around his shoulders, like he was afraid the warmth might disappear if he loosened his grip. His eyes wandered around the room, landing on family photos, the crooked stockings above the heater, the small stack of unopened mail on the side table. "You got a good home," Elijah said softly. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. "It's not much, but it's ours." "That's more than most folks got," Elijah replied. "More than they know how to keep." Daniel poured the soup into a bowl and set it on the coffee table, kneeling slightly so he didn't tower over the old man. "Careful," he said. "It's hot." Elijah nodded, hands shaking just enough to notice. He blew on the spoon 3 times before taking the smallest sip. "Oh," he murmured. "That's real good." Daniel smiled. Compliments like that felt earned when money was tight and meals were stretched thin. As Elijah ate, Daniel leaned against the armchair across from him, rubbing his palms together. He kept glancing down the hallway, listening for footsteps, ready to explain if one of the kids woke up. "You said you missed the bus," Daniel said gently. "You remember where you were heading?" Elijah frowned, staring into the bowl like the answer might float up. "I was supposed to meet my daughter," he said slowly. "She don't like when I'm late." "What's her name?" Daniel asked. Elijah opened his mouth, closed it, his brow creased, panic creeping in around the edges. "It was right there," he whispered. "I swear it was." Daniel felt that same tight pull in his chest again, the one that came when he saw fear mixed with embarrassment. "That's all right," Daniel said quickly. "We'll figure it out together." Elijah nodded, but his shoulders stayed tense. Outside, a car passed, tires crunching over ice. The heater kicked on with a low groan, pushing warm air through the vents. Elijah flinched at the sound. "You hear that?" he asked suddenly. "The heater," Daniel said. "Yeah, it's loud. Old thing." Elijah's eyes narrowed, his head tilting slightly, like he was listening to something deeper than noise. "It shouldn't hiss like that," he murmured. Daniel shrugged. "Been doing that for years." Elijah didn't answer. He took another sip of soup, but his gaze stayed fixed on the vent near the baseboard. Daniel stood and collected the empty bowl once Elijah finished. "You want to rest?" he asked. "You can sleep on the couch. I'll grab another blanket." "That'd be nice," Elijah said quietly. "Thank you, Daniel." Hearing his name spoken with that much gratitude made Daniel pause. "No problem," he said, suddenly uncomfortable with how heavy the moment felt. He dimmed the lights and headed toward the hallway. That's when Lily's door creaked open. "Daddy?" her sleepy voice whispered. Daniel turned instantly. "Hey, baby." She padded into the hallway, hair messy, stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Her eyes went straight to the couch, to Elijah. She froze. "Who's that?" she asked, not scared, just curious. Daniel knelt in front of her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "That's Mr. Elijah," he said softly. "He got a little lost tonight, so we're helping him stay warm." Elijah smiled carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Hello there," he said. "I won't be any trouble, I promise." Lily studied him for a long second, and nodded, like she'd made a decision. "Okay," she said. "It's cold outside." Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. "That's right," he said. "Now let's get you back to bed." As Daniel tucked Lily in, she whispered, "Mom would want us to help him." Daniel swallowed hard. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She would." Back in the living room, Elijah lay down stiffly, hands folded on his chest, eyes open and alert. "Try to sleep," Daniel said. "You're safe here." Elijah nodded, but sleep didn't come easily. Sometime later, Daniel wasn't sure how long, a sound dragged him out of half-sleep. Footsteps. Soft, uneven. Daniel sat up in bed, heart pounding. He strained to listen. Another sound followed, a low murmur, like someone talking to themselves. Daniel slicked out of bed and crept toward the living room. Elijah stood near the heater vent, one hand braced against the wall, his breath shallow. "You all right?" Daniel asked. Elijah turned sharply, eyes wide. "You need to fix this," he said urgently. "Right now." Daniel frowned. "Fix what?" "The vent," Elijah said, pointing. "It's leaking." Daniel sniffed instinctively. At first, he smelled nothing. Then, it hit him. Sharp, bitter, gas. His stomach dropped. "You smell that?" Elijah asked. Daniel nodded slowly, fear rushing in all at once. "Go wake your kids," Elijah said, voice suddenly calm, focused. "Get them outside." Daniel didn't question it. He sprinted down the hallway, heart hammering, gently shaking Lily and Noah awake. "Coats on," he whispered urgently. "Now." Minutes later, they stood outside wrapped in blankets, breath fogging the air. Daniel dialed emergency services with shaking fingers. When the firefighters arrived, lights flashing red against the snow, one of them knelt near the basement stairs and went still. "Good catch," the man said grimly. "Another hour and this place would have gone up. Daniel's legs nearly gave out. He looked at Elijah, who stood quietly beside him. Blanket draped over his shoulders. If he hadn't said something, the firefighter added, trailing off. Daniel stared at Elijah, realization crashing down on him. He hadn't just let a stranger in from the cold. He had let salvation walk through his front door. Elijah met his gaze and gave a small, tired smile. "Danger has a sound," he said softly. "You just gotta listen for it." And suddenly, Daniel understood something deep and unsettling. If he had chosen fear over kindness that night, if he had closed his door, if he had walked past a cold, old man on the sidewalk, Christmas morning would have never come. The red and blue lights painted Daniel's house in violent flashes, turning the snow into something unreal, like the world itself was blinking, unsure if it had just escaped disaster or walked straight into it. Daniel stood barefoot on the sidewalk, his jacket thrown over his shoulders, one arm wrapped around Lily, the other gripping Noah's small hand. Both kids were quiet in that stunned way children get when they sense how close something came without fully understanding it. Elijah stood a few steps away, blanket tight around him, shoulders squared despite the cold. The old man looked smaller out here, thinner somehow, like the night was trying to swallow him whole. A firefighter emerged from the basement, helmet tilted back, breath fogging the air. "Gas lines cracked clean through," he announced to Captain Hayes. "Right near the furnace. Corrosion. Leak was bad." Captain Hayes exhaled slowly. "How bad?" "Bad enough that if the heater cycled again, we'd be scraping this place off the block." Daniel's knees weakened. He leaned back against the patrol car, pressing his forehead to the cold metal. His chest felt tight, like his lungs couldn't decide whether to breathe or scream. Lily looked up at him. "Daddy, is our house broken?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Yeah, baby," he said softly, "but we're okay." The words barely held together. Captain Hayes walked over, his boots crunching on ice. He crouched down so he was eye level with the kids. "You two did great tonight," he said warmly. "Real brave." Noah nodded seriously. Lily hugged her rabbit tighter. Hayes stood and turned to Daniel. "Who noticed the leak?" he asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at Elijah. The old man shifted, uncomfortable under the attention. "It was him," Daniel said finally. "He heard it." Captain Hayes studied Elijah carefully. "You live here, sir?" he asked. Elijah shook his head. "No, sir. I was just passing through." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "You've got good instincts." Elijah shrugged. 40 years of listening for danger," he said quietly. The captain didn't push further. He nodded once, respectful. Police officers moved around the scene, radios crackling, neighbors peeking out from behind curtains and doors. A few had stepped onto their porches now, drawn by the lights and the whispers already spreading. "That's the guy," someone murmured. "The one Daniel brought inside. See, I told you that was risky." Daniel heard it. He straightened slowly, anger mixing with the lingering fear. A woman across the street folded her arms. "You don't know who people are these days," she said loudly. "Could have been anyone." Daniel turned toward her, voice shaking but firm. "Could have been," he said. But tonight. The woman looked away. An officer approached Daniel with a notepad. "Sir, we're gonna need some information." Daniel nodded, handing the kids to Captain Hayes for a moment. As he answered questions, his gaze kept drifting back to Elijah. The old man stood apart now, staring at the house like he was watching a ghost. "You cold?" Daniel asked, stepping closer. Elijah smiled faintly. "Cold don't bother me much." "That's a lie," Daniel said gently. Elijah chuckled. "Yeah, maybe." The officer finished up and walked away. Daniel hesitated, then asked, "You really work safety inspection?" Elijah nodded. "Factories, apartment buildings, schools. I spent my life making sure other folks made it home." Daniel exhaled slowly. "You saved my kids tonight." Elijah's eyes softened. "I just heard what others didn't." Captain Hayes returned, holding a clipboard. "We're shutting the gas off completely," he said. "House isn't safe tonight." Daniel nodded. "I figured." "You got somewhere to go?" Daniel glanced down at his kids, then back at Elijah. "We'll stay with family," he said automatically, then stopped. He didn't have family close. Captain Hayes noticed the pause. "There's a warming center open at the church," he offered. "Couple blocks down." Daniel nodded again, but his face fell. Before he could respond, Elijah spoke up. "I don't need to go anywhere," he said quietly. "My daughter'll come get me." Daniel blinked. "You remember now?" Elijah frowned, uncertainty flickering across his face. I think so," he said. "She don't like when I'm late." Daniel felt that familiar ache again. Captain Hayes turned to an officer. "Run his name," he said. "See if there's a missing person report." The officer nodded and stepped away. Minutes stretched long. The neighbors' whispers grew louder, heavier. Some stared at Elijah like he was a mystery. Others, like he was a mistake. Daniel moved closer to Elijah, standing beside him. "Whatever happens," Daniel said quietly, "you're not alone tonight." Elijah looked up at him, surprised. "You didn't have to stop," Elijah said softly. "Most people don't." Daniel swallowed. "I almost didn't." That confession sat between them, heavy and honest. The officer returned, face serious. "Captain," he said, "he's listed as missing. Reported earlier this evening." Elijah blinked. "Missing?" "Yes, sir," the officer continued gently. "Your daughter's been searching for you." Elijah's hands trembled. Daniel felt his heart drop. "She's probably scared," Elijah whispered. "We're gonna get her here," Captain Hayes said. "She's on her way." Elijah nodded slowly, shame and relief mixing in his expression. Daniel crouched slightly, so Elijah didn't feel towered over. "She's gonna be real happy to see you," Daniel said. Elijah looked at the house one last time. "Funny," he murmured. "I wandered all night and still ended up exactly where I needed to be." Daniel felt tears sting his eyes. Across the street, the same neighbors who warned him earlier stood silent now. No more comments, no more advice, just the truth settling in. Fear would have killed them all. Kindness saved them. And Christmas, the quiet, fragile Christmas Daniel had tried so hard to protect, had already done its work. The night settled into a heavy, unnatural calm, the kind that comes after danger backs away at the last possible second. Fire trucks idled quietly now, their lights dimmed, no longer screaming urgency. Snow drifted down slow and steady, softening the edges of everything it touched, like the world itself was trying to breathe again. Daniel sat on the curb, exhaustion finally catching up to him. Lily was curled under his arm, wrapped in a thick silver thermal blanket, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Noah leaned against Daniel's shoulder, eyes glassy, fighting sleep with the stubborn determination only kids had. Their small breaths came out in little white clouds. A few feet away, Elijah sat on the back bumper of an ambulance. His hands rested neatly on his knees, trembling just enough to notice. The thin sweater under his coat looked even thinner under the harsh white lights. He seemed older now, smaller, but his eyes were clear, sharpened, like a man who'd spent his life learning when to panic and when not to. Captain Robert Hayes walked over, boots crunching against the ice, clipboard tucked under his arm. "You holding up?" Hayes asked Daniel. Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, just processing." Hayes glanced back at the house. Dark, silent, sealed off by caution tape. "You came real close tonight." Daniel swallowed. Too close. Hayes studied him for a moment. Most people would have walked past that man. Daniel didn't answer right away. Across the street, the sound of tires skidding to a stop cut through the quiet. A patrol car pulled up hard, door flying open before it fully stopped. "Elijah!" a woman cried out. Her voice cracked the night wide open. Elijah's head snapped up instantly. The fog that had hovered around him all evening vanished in a heartbeat. "Claire?" he said, already standing. She ran straight to him, arms wrapping around his chest, so tightly it looked like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. Her breath came in sobs. "I've been looking everywhere," she cried. "Everywhere!" Elijah hugged her back, hands shaking. "I'm sorry, baby. I missed the bus. I tried to remember." She pulled back just enough to hold his face in her hands, tears streaming freely. "I know. It's okay. You're safe." Daniel watched from the curb, his chest tightening. Not with fear this time, but something deeper, something heavier. Captain Hayes approached the woman gently. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Hayes. Your father's all right. Cold, shaken, but all right." She nodded quickly, wiping her cheeks. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Then she turned toward Daniel. "You're the one who helped him?" she asked. Daniel stood slowly, kids still bundled against him. Yeah, he was lost. It was cold." Her expression shifted instantly. She walked toward him with purpose. "You didn't just help him," she said, voice shaking. "You saved him." Daniel shook his head. "He saved us." She frowned, confused. Hayes filled in quietly. "Your father detected a major gas leak in this house. Another hour, and this family wouldn't have made it through the night." Her eyes widened. She turned back to Elijah. "Dad, you did that?" Elijah shrugged, embarrassed. "Just heard something wrong." Claire let out a broken laugh through tears. "You never stopped being you." She faced Daniel again, emotion flooding her voice. "I was terrified tonight, thinking what if nobody stopped? What if everyone just walked past?" Daniel swallowed hard. "I almost did." Her face tightened. "But you didn't." She stepped forward without hesitation and hugged him, hard. "Thank you," she whispered fiercely, "for opening your door." Daniel froze for half a second, then returned the hug, awkwardly. "You don't owe me anything." "Yes," she said firmly, pulling back. "I do." Elijah watched them, his mind clearer than it had been all night. "I told you," he said softly to Daniel. "Most folks don't open doors anymore." Daniel looked at him. "You were so clear tonight," he said gently. "Focused." Elijah exhaled. "Mind comes and goes, but muscle memory stays." Claire nodded. "Dad was a safety inspector for 40 years. Gas systems, buildings. He trained people to listen for danger instead of waiting for disaster." Daniel let out a shaky breath. "Guess I let the right stranger in." Captain Hayes cleared his throat. "House isn't livable tonight," he said, "but it can be fixed. You've got your lives. That's what matters." Daniel hugged his kids tighter. Riley peeked out from her blanket. "Daddy, is Mr. Elijah going home?" Elijah knelt slowly, smiling warmly. "I am, sweetheart, but I won't forget you." She nodded seriously. "You can visit," Elijah chuckled. "I'd like that." Claire helped him back into the ambulance. Before the doors closed, she turned to Daniel one last time. "If you ever need anything," she said firmly, "you call me." Daniel nodded. "Take care of him." "I will." The ambulance pulled away, disappearing into the falling snow. Fire trucks followed soon after. Neighbors drifted back inside quietly, shame heavier than then. Daniel stood in the cold with his children, staring at the dark house that almost took everything. Captain Hayes paused beside him. "You did good tonight." Daniel watched the last lights fade. As he walked away with his kids, he glanced back once more, knowing one simple choice had changed everything. By the time the last fire truck turned the corner and the neighborhood swallowed the noise again, Daniel Moore felt like he'd lived through a whole lifetime in one night. The street looked normal now. Quiet porches, sleepy houses, the same string lights blinking red and green in windows, like nothing had almost happened. But Daniel's body still hummed with adrenaline. His hands wouldn't stop shaking, even after he got Lily and Noah into the borrowed car Captain Hayes arranged for them. A church volunteer drove them to the warming center 2 blocks away. The woman kept glancing at Daniel like she wanted to ask questions, but could tell he wasn't in the mood to explain how close his children had come to dying in their sleep. Inside the church gym, it smelled like coffee, disinfectant, and old wood. Folding chairs lined one wall. Cots were set up like little islands. People murmured quietly. Families displaced by broken heaters. A few folks who just needed a warm place to exist for a night. Daniel settled Lily and Noah onto a cot, wrapped them tight, and sat on the edge with his elbows on his knees. He kept seeing the gas leak in his head. Not the pipe itself. He hadn't even fully looked at it. But the idea of it. The invisible threat. The way danger had been sitting under his feet while he was making soup and tucking in blankets and trying to be a good dad. He stared at the floor. Jaw clenched hard. If he'd ignored Elijah's warning, if he'd told him to sit down, if he'd been too tired, if he'd been too afraid. He swallowed, and the back of his throat burned. A soft hand touched his shoulder. Daniel looked up and fought Captain Hayes standing over him, helmet under his arm, expression calmer than earlier, but still serious. "You did the right thing coming here," Hayes said quietly. "Warm, safe, supervised. We'll make sure your house gets dealt with tomorrow." Daniel nodded, but his eyes were distant. Hayes lowered his voice. "You okay?" Daniel let out a weak laugh. "No." Hayes's mouth tightened like he respected the honesty. "Yeah," he said. "Makes sense." Daniel stared at his sleeping kids. Lily's mouth was slightly open, rabbit tucked tight under her chin. Noah was curled into a ball, shoulders rising and falling with slow breaths. "They were gonna be gone," Daniel whispered. "I didn't even know. I was gonna wake up and—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Hayes didn't rush him. He just stood there like a quiet anchor. Daniel took a shaky breath. "And my neighbors," he cut himself off, anger flickering. "They were so loud earlier, so sure I was stupid for helping him, like kindness is some kind of weakness." Hayes nodded slowly. "People get scared. Scared people talk too much." Daniel's eyes narrowed. They're not the ones who would have buried their kids. Hayes didn't argue. He just said, "Tomorrow they'll feel it." Daniel looked up. "Feel what?" Hayes pointed subtly toward the church entrance. Outside, a news van rolled into the parking lot. Then another. Daniel blinked, confused. "What the?" Hayes sighed. "Scanner chatter," he said. "They catch near explosion, family saved, missing senior found, and suddenly everybody wants a story for the morning segment." Daniel's stomach twisted. He'd spent years keeping his life quiet, not because he was hiding, because he didn't have the energy to perform his struggle for the world. Now, the world was coming anyway. Just after midnight, Claire Turner arrived at the church. She walked in like she'd been crying for hours, eyes puffy, hair slightly undone, still wearing the same winter coat from earlier. But her posture was strong, the kind of strong you get when you've been holding fear in your hands all night and finally got permission to put it down. Elijah walked beside her, calmer now, moving carefully. He looked exhausted, like the cold had finally dug its hooks into his bones. But he wasn't confused anymore, not fully. He spotted Daniel immediately and nodded. Claire approached Daniel's cot, stopping a few feet away, like she didn't want to invade his space. "Daniel," she said softly. Daniel stood. "Hey." Claire glanced at the sleeping kids. Her eyes filled again. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "Yeah," Daniel said, voice rough. "They're my whole world." Claire nodded, swallowing hard. "That's why I'm here." Daniel blinked. "What do you mean?" Claire took a breath. "The police ran my dad's name," she said. "I know. They told me. He has early-stage dementia. It's been getting worse." Daniel's heart sank, even though he'd already suspected it. Claire continued. "Tonight was the first time he wandered off for hours. He slipped out while I was in the kitchen. I thought I heard the door, but She shook her head, shame washing over her face. "I blamed myself the whole way here." Daniel held up a hand gently. "Hey, don't do that." Claire looked up, eyes shining. "But what if he hadn't ended up on your street?" she asked, voice cracking. "What if he'd fallen somewhere? What if—" Elijah touched her shoulder softly. "Baby," he said, voice gentle, "I'm here." Claire turned, hugging him again briefly, then faced Daniel with new intensity. "You didn't just shelter him," she said. "You saved him, and then he saved you. That's not coincidence. That's something bigger." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. Claire glanced toward the entrance again, where the news crew was setting up quietly, whispering, adjusting cameras. "They're here for you," Claire said under her breath. Daniel's eyes widened. "For me?" "For the whole thing," Claire corrected. "A missing senior found. A family nearly killed by a gas leak. And now the world gets to see the truth. A stranger warning them in time. Christmas Eve miracle." Her jaw tightened. "They're gonna spin it however they want." Daniel felt heat rise in his chest. "I don't want cameras around my kids." Claire nodded instantly. "Then don't let them." Before Daniel could respond, one of the neighbors walked into the church. It was Mrs. Patel from 2 houses down. She looked small, like someone had taken her confidence and drained it out of her. Behind her came Mr. Dorsey, the one who'd muttered earlier about Daniel being foolish for bringing in a stranger. They approached slowly, like they weren't sure they'd be allowed to come near him. Daniel's muscles tightened. Mrs. Patel cleared her throat. "Daniel," she began, voice shaky. "We heard what happened. We wanted to check on the kids." Daniel didn't answer. Mr. Dorsey rubbed his hands together nervously. "Look, man," he started, "about earlier. We was just worried." Daniel's eyes sharpened. "Worried about who?" Mr. Dorsey swallowed. "About you, about your babies." Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. "Nah," he said quietly. "You were worried about me. You were suspicious of him." Elijah stood a little straighter. Mr. Dorsey's face flushed. "We didn't know." "That's the point," Daniel cut in. His voice stayed low but carried like weight. "You didn't know, and you still spoke like you did." Mrs. Patel's eyes filled with tears. "We're sorry," she whispered. Behind her came Mr. Dorsey, the one who'd muttered earlier about Daniel being foolish for bringing in a stranger. They approached slowly, like they weren't sure they'd be allowed to come near him. Daniel's muscles tightened. Mrs. Patel cleared her throat. "Daniel," she began, voice shaky, "we heard what happened. We wanted to check on the kids." Daniel didn't answer. Mr. Dorsey rubbed his hands together nervously. "Look, man," he started. "About earlier, we were just worried." Daniel's eyes sharpened. "Worried about who?" Mr. Dorsey swallowed. "About you, about your babies." Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. "Nah," he said quietly. "You weren't worried about me. You were suspicious of him." Elijah stood a little straighter. Mr. Dorsey's face flushed. "We didn't know." "That's the point," Daniel cut in. His voice stained low but carried like weight. "You didn't know, and you still spoke like you did." Mrs. Patel's eyes filled with tears. "We're sorry," she whispered. Daniel stared at them, anger buzzing under his skin. He wanted to lash out, wanted to say the harsh things that matched the harsh moment. But he looked down at Lily and Noah sleeping, and he thought of Maria again, her soft voice, her calm eyes. Kindness is never wasted. So Daniel exhaled and said, "Just do better." Mrs. Patel nodded quickly. "We will." Mr. Dorsey looked at Elijah, shame on his face. "Sir, I'm sorry too." Elijah's expression stayed gentle. "It's all right," he said softly. Fear makes folks act ugly. Daniel glanced at Elijah, surprised by that forgiveness. Elijah met his gaze like he understood. He'd lived long enough to know what bitterness did to a person. By early morning, the story was everywhere. Daniel didn't even have to turn on the TV. His phone started buzzing nonstop. Texts from coworkers, missed calls from unknown numbers, a voicemail from his supervisor. "Man, you okay? I saw something on Facebook." Claire came over holding her own phone. "It's on the neighborhood page," she said quietly. "Someone posted about it." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Posted what?" Claire turned the phone toward him. A blurry photo of his house with flashing lights. A caption, "Single dad lets stranger in on Christmas Eve. Ends up saving whole family from gas explosion. Neighbor says it's a miracle." Daniel's jaw clenched. Below the post were comments flying in faster than Daniel could read. Some were kind. "God bless that man. This is what Christmas is about. Praying for the family." Some were ugly. "Or maybe the stranger caused it. Why would you bring a random man around kids? He's lucky nothing worse happened." Daniel's hands curled into fists. Claire watched him carefully. "People always gotta turn something good into something suspicious," she murmured. Daniel exhaled through his nose, trying to calm the fire in his chest. Then another notification popped up. A local news channel. Request for interview. Daniel stared at it like it was poison. "No," he whispered. He looked down at his kids again. They didn't ask for attention. They didn't ask to be anyone's Christmas miracle segment. They just wanted a safe home and a dad who didn't fall apart. Daniel stood and walked outside the church into the cold morning air. The sky was pale, quiet. He leaned against the brick wall, hands shaking as he finally let the weight hit him fully. Claire stepped out a moment later, closing the door softly behind her. "You okay?" she asked. Daniel laughed once, short and sharp. "I keep thinking about how close it was," he admitted. "Like I was stirring soup and I could have been dead." Claire nodded slowly. "That's trauma," she said quietly. "That's real." Daniel stared into the distance. "And I almost didn't open the door." Claire's eyes softened. "But you did." Daniel swallowed hard. "Yeah," he whispered. "And now everybody's got an opinion." Claire stepped closer. "Let them," she said. "Opinions don't change facts." Daniel looked at her. "What's the fact?" Claire didn't hesitate. "The fact is," she said firmly, "your kindness saved my father. And my father's skills saved your kids. That's it. That's the truth. Daniel's chest tightened again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was gratitude mixed with exhaustion. Inside, the church bells began to ring softly, not loud, not dramatic, just a gentle reminder that it was Christmas Day now. Daniel closed his eyes for a second, and for the first time since Maria died, something about the day felt sacred again. Not because of gifts, not because of perfect traditions, but because of one simple, terrifying truth. Sometimes, the thing that saves your life is the choice you almost didn't make. Christmas morning arrived without ceremony. No music playing from radios, no laughter drifting through the house, no wrapping paper scattered across the floor. Just a pale gray sky pressing low over the church parking lot, and the slow, exhausted breathing of people who had survived something they weren't supposed to. Daniel sat at the edge of the cot, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it might give him answers. Lily and Noah were still asleep behind him, bundled together now, their small bodies instinctively finding comfort in each other. Seeing them like that, alive, warm, breathing, was the only thing keeping Daniel upright. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the gas line in his head. Imagined sparks that never happened. Imagined waking up to silence that would have meant the worst. He rubbed his face hard, dragging his palms down until they ached. I almost didn't open the door. That thought kept looping, louder every time. Footsteps approached. Captain Hayes stopped in front of him, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Figured you could use this, Hayes said quietly, handing one over. Daniel took it, hands trembling enough that the coffee sloshed dangerously close to the rim. Thanks, he muttered. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't feel awkward, just heavy. You're gonna crash later, Hayes said gently. When it hits. Daniel nodded. I know. Hayes glanced toward the kids. They doing okay? Yeah, Daniel said. They don't really understand how close it was. I'm grateful for that. Hayes studied Daniel carefully. You do. Daniel gave a tired half smile. That obvious? You're holding it together too well, Hayes replied. That usually means it hasn't broken yet. Daniel looked down at the coffee cup. What happens when it does? Hayes didn't sugarcoat it. You let it. Then you build back stronger. Daniel exhaled slowly. Across the gym, Elijah sat at a folding table with Claire. A social worker spoke to them quietly, explaining next steps, resources, care plans. Elijah nodded along, lucid, but visibly drained, like a man who'd run a marathon without realizing it. Claire caught Daniel watching and gave him a small, reassuring nod. That's when Daniel's phone buzzed again. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, he checked the screen. Mom, missed call 3, work group chat, 12 messages. Unknown number, voicemail. Daniel's chest tightened. He stood, careful not to wake the kids, and walked toward the quiet corner near the coffee station. He called his mother back first. Daniel? Her voice came through instantly, sharp with worry. Baby, are you okay? I saw something on the news. I'm okay, he said quickly. The kids are okay. She exhaled hard. Thank God. He leaned against the wall. I almost lost them, Ma. Her voice cracked. Oh, honey. I almost didn't help that man, Daniel admitted. I almost walked past him. There was a pause on the line. Then she said softly, But you didn't. Daniel swallowed. I keep thinking, what kind of father would I have been if I'd chosen fear instead? His mother didn't hesitate. A human one, she said. But you chose love. That's what matters. Daniel closed his eyes, tears finally spilling over. I'm tired, he whispered. I know, she said. Come home when you can. We'll cook. We'll sit. You don't have to be strong today." He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Okay. After he hung up, the voicemail from the unknown number played automatically. "Mr. Moore, this is Channel 6 News. We'd love to speak with you about last night's events." He deleted it mid-sentence. No interviews, no cameras, no sound bites. He wasn't turning his kids into a headline. Behind him, a voice spoke softly. "Daniel." He turned to see Elijah standing there, leaning lightly on his cane. Claire hovered nearby, ready to catch him if he wobbled. "You all right?" Daniel asked immediately. Elijah smiled faintly. "Clearer than I was last night." Daniel hesitated. "I'm glad." Elijah studied him closely. "You look like a man carrying a lot of weight." Daniel let out a breathy laugh. "That obvious?" Elijah nodded. "That kind of fear don't leave quick." Daniel looked down. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if I didn't let you in." Elijah placed a gentle hand on Daniel's arm. "Son," he said quietly, "don't punish yourself for a choice you didn't make." Daniel's jaw tightened. "But I almost did." Elijah's voice stayed calm. "Almost don't count." Daniel met his eyes. "You really believe that?" Elijah nodded. "I spent my life inspecting accidents after they happened. People always said, 'I almost noticed. I almost fixed it. I almost spoke up.'" He paused. "The only thing that ever mattered was what they actually did." Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. Elijah continued. "You open the door. That's where the story ends." Claire stepped forward. "And it doesn't end badly," she added gently. Daniel exhaled slowly. A few minutes later, the social worker waved Claire over again. "Duty calls," Claire said softly. Elijah turned to Daniel. "I wanted to say something before I go." Daniel straightened. "Yeah?" Elijah's eyes softened. "You reminded me that good men still exist. Men who act without asking what they'll get back." Daniel shook his head. "I just did what felt right." Elijah smiled. "That's rarer than you think." They shook hands, firm, respectful. As Elijah turned away, Daniel felt a sudden wave of emotion crash into him. "Hey," Daniel called. Elijah paused. "Thank you," Daniel said, voice thick, "for everything." Elijah nodded once. "Merry Christmas, son." When Elijah and Claire left, the gym felt emptier somehow. Daniel returned to the cot just as Lily stirred. "Daddy?" she murmured. "I'm here," he said instantly, sitting beside her. She rubbed her eyes. "Is the house okay?" Daniel hesitated, then answered honestly, "Not yet, but it will be." She nodded, accepting that, like kids do. "Mr. Elijah saved us," she said sleepily. Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah, he did." She yawned. "You save him first." That broke him. Daniel bent forward, pressing his forehead gently to her hair, silent tears soaking into the blanket. Noah stirred too, blinking up at him. "Why you crying?" he asked. Daniel laughed through tears. "Happy tears," he said, "and tired ones." Captain Hayes approached again, this time holding paperwork. "House will be repaired," Hayes said. "Gas companies covering part of it. Community funds stepping in too." Daniel blinked. "They are?" Hayes nodded. Word travels fast when people feel ashamed. Daniel understood. Fear had spoken loudly last night. Now guilt was doing its work. Later that afternoon, Daniel finally let himself sit alone near the church window. Snow fell softly outside. He thought about Maria, her laugh, her voice, the way she used to squeeze his hand before answering the door. Kindness is never wasted. He whispered the words aloud. For the first time since her death, the memory didn't hurt as much. It felt guiding. Daniel didn't know what the future held. Bills would still be there. Work would still be hard. Life wouldn't magically soften overnight. But one thing was clear now. He wasn't weak for choosing kindness. He was strong because of it. And when Christmas came again, next year or the year after, Daniel knew exactly what he'd teach his kids. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open the door when everything in the world tells you not to. The house didn't smell like gas anymore. That was the first thing Daniel noticed when he unlocked the front door 3 weeks later. No sharp bite in the air. No invisible danger curling through the walls. Just the clean, neutral scent of fresh insulation and sawdust. The smell of things being fixed instead of falling apart. Daniel stood in the doorway for a long moment, keys still in his hand, coat unzipped, cold air rushing in behind him. Lily and Noah hovered at his sides, bundled in scarves and excitement, bouncing on their heels. "Can we go in now?" Noah asked, tugging at Daniel's sleeve. Daniel swallowed. "Yeah," he said softly, "we can go in." They stepped inside together. The furnace hummed gently, steady, reliable, alive. New vents lined the walls, silver and clean, where old rusted ones used to sit. A bright yellow inspection tag hung proudly from the pipe, stamped and signed. Safe for occupancy. Daniel closed the door behind them and leaned his forehead against it for a second, breathing. They were whole. Not the broken version. Not the almost gone version. The living one. Lily dropped her bag and spun slowly in the middle of the living room. "It looks the same," she said, disappointed. Daniel chuckled. "That's kind of the point." Noah crouched near the heater vent, putting his hand in front of it. Warm air blew gently across his fingers. His eyes widened. "It's like magic," he whispered. Daniel knelt beside him. "It's like safety," he corrected gently. They unpacked slowly, deliberately, like people relearning trust. Every sound made Daniel flinch at first. The click of the thermostat, the thud of a dropped shoe, the creak of a cabinet door. His body still remembered how close they'd come. But slowly, minute by minute, his shoulders lowered. That night, after the kids were asleep, Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table. The same table where bills piled up, where he'd eaten silent dinners after Maria died, where fear had lived quietly for years. Now there was an envelope waiting for him, cream-colored, heavy paper, his name written neatly on the front. He already knew who it was from. Claire. He opened it carefully. Inside were documents, official, stamped, signed. Utility assistance approval, a furnace grant confirmation, a follow-up inspection schedule, and a handwritten note, folded once. "Daniel, I know pride makes this uncomfortable, but please understand, this wasn't charity. This was community. You gave my father safety. We gave you stability. That's how it's supposed to work. He asks about the kids every day. Come visit when you can." Claire, Daniel read it twice, then a third time. He leaned back in his chair and laughed quietly. A real laugh, surprised and breathy. "Maria," he murmured to the empty room, "you'd be smiling so hard right now." The weeks that followed didn't suddenly become easy. Bills still came. Work still demanded overtime. Life still pressed in where it always had. But something had shifted. Daniel wasn't alone anymore, not in the way he used to be. At work, a supervisor pulled him aside one afternoon. "Heard about what happened," the man said awkwardly. "You good?" Daniel nodded. "Getting there." The supervisor cleared his throat. "We're restructuring routes next month. There's a lead driver position opening. Slight pay bump, more stable hours. Daniel blinked. You serious? The man shrugged. Good people deserve a break sometimes. Daniel walked out of that office, stunned. At the grocery store, neighbors smiled differently now. Softer, quieter, less suspicious. Some apologized without saying the word. One woman left a bag of canned goods on his porch with a note that read, "For when you're too tired to cook." Daniel didn't knock on her door to say thank you. He just stood there for a long time, holding the bag. And then there were the visits. Every Sunday afternoon, Daniel packed the kids into the car and drove across town to the assisted living center. Elijah waited by the window every time. "Look who's here," he'd say, voice brightening like the sun had come with them. Lily brought drawings. Noah brought questions. Daniel brought quiet gratitude. They played cards. They shared stories. They sat in comfortable silence. One afternoon, Elijah watched Daniel carefully as the kids colored on the floor. "You carry yourself different now," Elijah said. Daniel shrugged. "I feel different." Elijah nodded. "That's what happens when fear loses its grip." Daniel hesitated. "You ever regret it? Being the kind of man who notices danger instead of ignoring it?" Elijah smiled faintly. "Regret the truth?" He shook his head. "Only thing I regret is the times I stayed quiet when I shouldn't have." Daniel absorbed that. On Christmas Eve, 1 year after the night everything almost ended, Daniel stood in the living room. The tree was small again, still simple, but this time it felt intentional. One ornament hung lower than the rest, a small wooden angel. Elijah had carved it himself. Lily adjusted it carefully. He said angels don't always have wings. Noah grinned. "Sometimes they have canes." Daniel laughed. "Sometimes they just knock." They sat on the couch together, cocoa warming their hands, the heater humming steadily behind the walls. Daniel looked at his kids, older now, stronger, still innocent. "I want to tell you something," he said quietly. They both looked up. "That night, when Mr. Elijah knocked on our door, I was scared." Lily frowned. "But you let him in." "I almost didn't," Daniel admitted. Noah's eyes widened. "Why?" Daniel chose his words carefully. "Because fear is loud, and kindness is quiet." Lily leaned against him. "But you listened to the quiet one." Daniel kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, I did." Outside, snow began to fall again, slow and gentle, nothing like the night that once threatened to take everything. Daniel didn't feel like a hero. He felt human, and that felt better. Later that night, when the kids were asleep, Daniel stood alone by the tree. He picked up the angel ornament and turned it over in his hands. "Thank you," he whispered. Not sure who he was thanking anymore. Maria, Elijah, life itself, maybe all of it. He placed the ornament back on the tree and turned off the lights. The house stayed warm. The silence stayed peaceful. And Daniel Moore finally believed something he hadn't in years. That sometimes the smallest choices carry the biggest mercy. The heater clicked on just before dawn. It was a soft sound, barely noticeable, but Daniel heard it anyway. He always did now. He lay still in bed, staring up at the ceiling, listening as warm air moved through the vents, filling the house slowly, evenly, like a steady breath. Not rushed, not strained, just working. Safe. Daniel turned his head and glanced toward the kids' room. Their door was cracked open, a sliver of soft nightlight spilling into the hallway. He could hear Noah's faint snore, Lily shifting in her sleep. Alive. warm. Here, a year ago, that sound, the quiet hum of heat, could have been the last thing they ever heard. That thought still hit him sometimes, out of nowhere, like a punch behind the ribs. He sat up slowly and swung his feet to the floor. The cold wood didn't bite like it used to. Another small thing he noticed now, another quiet blessing. Daniel padded into the living room, wrapped himself in an old hoodie, and sank onto the couch. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, lights off, branches thin but stubbornly green. The wooden angel hung low, right where Lily insisted it belonged. He reached out and touched it gently. "You didn't look like much," he whispered. "Neither did I." The sky outside was still dark, but the edge of morning crept in, that gray-blue color that feels like the world stretching awake. Daniel leaned back and closed his eyes, and the voice came. Not loud, not dramatic, just his own thoughts, steady and honest. "I thought I was saving a stranger from the cold." He remembered the way Elijah had stood on the sidewalk that night, lost, shivering, apologizing for existing. But he was saving us from something far worse. Daniel exhaled slowly. He stood and walked to the heater vent near the hallway, crouching down like he'd done dozens of times since the repair. He placed his hand in front of it, feeling the warmth roll across his palm. Real, reliable, earned. He thought about all the doors he'd passed in his life, doors he didn't knock on because he didn't want to, doors he didn't open because he didn't want trouble, doors he closed behind him because grief told him it was safer that way. After Maria died, his world had shrunk. Work, home, kids. That was it. No risks, no strangers, no softness. Kindness felt expensive when you were already tired. He'd convinced himself that protecting his family meant keeping everything out. But that night proved something different. Sometimes protection looks like opening the door. The sun finally broke through the clouds, spilling light across the living room floor. Dust danced in it. The house didn't feel haunted by what almost happened anymore. It felt lived in. Daniel made coffee and sat back down, cradling the mug in both hands. His phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "Dad's asking if Noah still likes dinosaurs or if he's moved on to sharks." Daniel smiled. Still dinosaurs. Sharks scare him. A moment later, good. Dinosaurs are safer. Daniel laughed quietly. Space out. He thought about Elijah, how the old man drifted between clarity and confusion, how some days he remembered everything, and some days he forgot what year it was. But one thing Elijah never forgot: kindness. Daniel had noticed that. Elijah remembered faces, remembered warmth, remembered who made him feel safe. Memory fades, but care leaves marks deeper than facts. That thought sat heavy and gentle in Daniel's chest. Later that morning, Lily padded out in her socks, rubbing her eyes. "You up early?" she said. Daniel smiled. Couldn't sleep. She crawled onto the couch beside him, leaning into his side like she used to when she was little. "Daddy?" she asked quietly. "Yeah, baby? Are you still scared?" Daniel paused. Honest answers mattered now. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not like before." She nodded, thoughtful. "I was scared too, that night." He wrapped an arm around her. "I know. But Mr. Elijah wasn't," she said. "He was cold, but he wasn't scary." Daniel swallowed. "No, he wasn't." She yawned. "I think he was supposed to find us." Daniel kissed her hair. "Maybe we were supposed to find each other." Noah stumbled in next, hair wild, dragging his blanket. "Is it breakfast?" he asked. Almost, Daniel said. They ate together at the table. Nothing fancy. Toast, eggs, jam. The heater worked quietly in the background, doing its job without asking for attention. After breakfast, Daniel bundled the kids up and walked them outside. The neighborhood looked the same. Same houses, same sidewalks, same cars. But Daniel saw it differently now. He waved at neighbors he used to nod past. Some waved back, some didn't. That was okay. Kindness didn't need applause. As the kids played, Daniel stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, watching the breath puff from their mouths in the cold air. Sometimes angels don't look like angels. Elijah didn't. He looked like a problem, a risk, an inconvenience, and Daniel almost let fee. He leaned against the railing, eyes drifting to the street. Sometimes they're lost, cold, and knocking quietly. That line settled into him like truth does, not loud, not flashy, but impossible to ignore once it's there. Later that afternoon, Daniel drove to the assisted living center alone. Elijah sat in his usual spot, staring out the window. He didn't turn right away when Daniel entered. "Mr. Turner?" Daniel said gently. Elijah blinked, then smiled. "There you are." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Daniel spoke. "You ever think about that night?" Elijah nodded slowly. "Sometimes." "You remember it?" "Pieces," Elijah said. "I remember knocking. I remember being cold. I remember a door opening." Daniel's throat tightened. "That was me." Elijah patted his hand. "Good door." Daniel laughed softly. "I almost didn't," he admitted. Elijah looked at him then, really looked. "Most people don't open doors anymore," he said, repeating the words he'd spoken weeks earlier. "They build walls and call it safety." Daniel nodded. "I used to think that way." "And now?" Elijah asked. Daniel thought about his kids, about his home, about warmth moving through pipes that used to threaten them. "Now I think safety sometimes comes from letting the right people in." Elijah smiled. They sat until visiting hours ended. On the drive home, Daniel felt lighter, not because life was easy, but because it made sense again. That night, Daniel stood alone by the window, watching snow drift down under the streetlight. He held the wooden angel in his hand one more time. "Open the door," he whispered, not as advice, as a reminder, because he knew fear would come back, hard times would return, moments of doubt would knock just as quietly as Elijah once did. And when they did, Daniel wanted to remember who he was when it mattered. Not a hero, not a saint, just a man who chose warmth over fear. He placed the ornament back on the tree and turned out the light. The house stayed warm, the night stayed quiet, and Daniel Moore slept, knowing something simple and powerful. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness is the thing that keeps the whole world from burning down.